Another day of boat projects here in the boat shed. I have not been recording these smaller projects such as adding pad eyes to either side of the cockpit. Those would be for clipping in, or adding this extra mount for the lagoon table leg in the cockpit. But I do have many projects going on all at once, and the idea is to kind of just release these videos as I complete them. So here's a couple now. It is time to change out the muffler. So the original engine to the Contessas of this vintage was actually the Westerbeek Vire. I have a Yanmar 1GM10, which actually did come with the later model Contessas, but this was a retrofit. So the muffler that I have, it's called a Hydro Hush water lift exhaust silencer is what it says on there. And this is actually a Westerbeek muffler. So I'm thinking there's a pretty good chance that this is the original muffler from when this boat was built, because, you know, the Westerbeek, you would think the Westerbeek engine had a Westerbeek muffler. And it's actually performed very well. I've already removed it, but because of its age, there are some issues. Well, number one, the design of this is that it's clamped. You have the aluminum piece here clamped to the high temperature rubber. And these can and have failed, and I just replace them every year. Number two, the aluminum part here is starting to corrode. There's some pretty deep pits, although that I could probably remedy that with some epoxy. But lastly, it's starting to split over here, the rubber. And it's probably because when this was installed, it was just, you know, this piece is forced up, and it's been sitting like that for years. So although that's a great muffler, I don't believe that they're available. So my next option here is the Vetus Waterlock Muffler. This is 45R, I believe is the model. It does have an interesting design with the different chambers. Does not have a check valve. There are other models that Vetus makes that do have a check valve, but none that would fit this boat. Only issue I have is that this is made of PVC, which will melt if the engine is run dry. I have run this muffler dry a few times. One time when the impeller failed, as well as just engine testing, and I've never had a problem. I think because this is a thick high temperature rubber and aluminum. So I'm forced to go in this direction, and I hope that this will work out. I've kind of played around with the positioning. I've had to move this hose a bit just by turning the elbow here on the cockpit drain. Also, that little clamp, which is actually screwed into that little shelf, was holding down that muffler, and I'm gonna retain that for this. I think I'm just gonna have to play around with the different hoses, because I have two different hose sizes here versus there. All right, so this installation's actually a little easier than I thought. Once I move that drain hose, it actually fit in there pretty well. But luckily I had a leftover piece of 1 3/4 exhaust hose, because the other one was too short. So 1 3/4, the outlet is 1 3/4, but this is actually the one leading to the exit is 1 7/8. So I'm making an adapter. I mean, this is PVC, so I'm using a piece of Schedule 40 PVC pipe. This is 1.5 inches, and I can pretty much squeeze it down into the 1 3/4, and I know that it'll fit in the 1 7/8. So onward. And also the inlet piece, which is removable, has two markings under the hose right where the clamps are, and those are kind of an indication where you could put the where you could put an exhaust temperature alarm, which makes sense right before it goes into the muffler. And I think that's 100% necessary for this type of muffler made of PVC. And here's how I'm installing that adapter. Put the PVC pipe and the wet exhaust hose in a vise, and then just heat it with a heat gun a little bit at a time, and clamp it down a bit. It's already gone in quite a bit. And now fully installed. So I have double clamped all hoses, including where the adapter that I made is out of that Schedule 40 PVC pipe. So one issue I did run into is closing that seacock, in an emergency. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this clamp, and that'll allow me enough play in this hose to actually close it like that. And this isn't going to go anywhere. This hose is so stiff. Muffler, I mean, even if the boat were inverted, the muffler is going to stay there. And not being happy with the fact that I have to struggle to close a seacock, I did look at a few options, and ultimately what I did was, number one, I added this small galvanized strap to kind of lift the hose up a bit. And then number two is I took off this handle from seacock. I just took the nut off. Then I cut off about an inch, maybe a little less, shaped it, put the cover back on, and bolted it back on, and now it's no problem. There's plenty of clearance, so I don't have to worry about that part. So I think that finishes it off. I want to add an exhaust temperature alarm right about here, and I want to upgrade these clamps, but other than that, I'm done. This next project should be relatively simple, but nonetheless valuable. So this is the center line cleat on the foredeck, the one I use for anchoring. And what often happens is my jib sheets will catch on this, and then I'll have to run forward in the middle of a tack or a jibe to unfoul the sheet. So I did come across this on an old website. I'm not going to take credit for this idea. I believe the website was eoceanic.com. And what it is it's a preventer. So I took a PVC T-fitting. This is for 1-inch PVC pipe on either side here, and I cut it up in order to fit. So I kind of shaped it with a rasp like that. And that's kind of roughly the way I'm going to do this. I've painted them black, not just to dress them up, but for a little bit of UV protection. And the last step was to drill a couple holes in each piece, thread some bungee cord through, tie a couple of stopper knots, melt the ends, and then install it. And that'll do it. So I called it a preventer, and that's really what it is. I'm calling it a Jib Sheet Preventer since it doesn't really have a name. But I think that'll complete it, and it should work.